The storm swept across the frontier with a violence Clara Whitfield had not seen in years. Wind clawed at the shutters, rain lashed the roof, and the sky cracked with thunder that rattled her small homestead to its bones. Clara was used to storms, used to loneliness too, but something about this night felt different. As if the dark carried a message she couldn't yet understand. She had just banked the fire and was preparing to climb into her narrow bed when she heard it, a thin, wavering cry carried on the wind. At first she thought it was only the storm playing tricks, but the sound came again, weak but unmistakable. Not an animal. Not the wind. A child. Clara froze, heart pounding. No children lived anywhere near her isolated patch of land, and travelers never passed during weather this harsh. Grabbing her shawl and lantern, she hurried to the door, the cold wind slicing through her as soon as she stepped outside. The rain stung her cheeks as she followed the faint cry toward the barn. Inside the barn, shadows trembled with the flicker of her lantern light. The horses snorted nervously, stamping at the unfamiliar noise. Clara moved slowly, scanning the hay-strewn floor, and then she saw it. Nestled beside a pile of saddlebags was a small cradle board, beautifully crafted with hand-painted patterns. It was soaked from the rain and covered with dirt as though dropped in haste. Clara fell to her knees, lifting it gently. Inside lay an infant, no more than a few months old, wrapped in a damp blanket. The baby's lips were pale, her breathing shallow, her cries so faint they barely reached the air. "Oh, sweetheart," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "Who left you here?" She didn't expect an answer. Whoever had abandoned the child, whether by desperation or injury or something worse, was nowhere to be seen. Clara acted on instinct. She gathered the cradleboard close, shielding the infant from the wind as she rushed back to the house. Once inside, she set the lantern down and lit every lamp she had, flooding the room with warmth. The baby's tiny hands trembled as Clara unwrapped the wet blanket and replaced it with one of her own. Soft and worn from years of use. The infant's eyes fluttered open, dark and unfocused. Clara felt a pang of emotion so sudden it startled her. It had been years since she held a child, years since she buried the one she lost before birth. Years since her husband passed and left her to walk the world alone. Yet in her arms, this little girl fought to breathe, fought to cling to life, as if trusting Clara without hesitation. Clara warmed goat's milk over the fire, testing it carefully before offering it to the child. At first, the baby was too weak to drink, but after several heart-stopping moments, she latched on. Clara released a shaking breath, her eyes stinging with tears she hadn't allowed herself in years. All through the night, Clara tended the child, warming her, feeding her in tiny amounts, whispering soft comfort. Every cry, every stir tightened the knot in Clara's chest. Who was this little girl? Why had she been left behind? And who might come seeking her? Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the small homestead, Clara fought a quieter, more intimate battle, the battle to keep this fragile life from slipping away. And though she didn't know it yet, this night, the night she found the child, would change not only her life, but the life of a warrior whose footsteps were already heading her way with the first light of dawn. Dawn crept slowly across the horizon, the storm clouds breaking apart into strips of soft pink and gray. Clara stood at the kitchen table, exhausted but determined, rocking the infant in her arms. The baby had survived the night barely. Her breathing was steadier now. Her tiny fingers curled around Clara's thumb as if claiming her. Clara murmured to the child, "We'll figure out who you belong to, little one. I promise." But even as she said it, an unease settled over her. Whoever had left the baby outside her barn had done so in desperation or danger. And danger rarely stayed far away. She had just laid the infant in a basket near the fire when her horses sounded the alarm, a sharp, anxious snort followed by restless shifting. Clara stiffened. Animals sensed what humans didn't. Someone was near. Her hand moved automatically to the rifle above the door. She didn't want trouble, but living alone on the frontier meant she could never pretend it didn't exist. Stepping out onto the porch, Clara scanned the land. For a moment, she saw nothing but wide fields washed in morning light. Then a figure appeared on the ridge, moving slowly, limping, leaning against a staff. A man, no more than that. Even from a distance she saw the distinctive clothing, the braided hair, the painted feathers hanging from his belt. Apache, and he was coming straight toward her homestead. Clara's breath caught. Fear rose in her throat, but she kept her rifle steady. The man didn't move like a threat. He moved like someone who had traveled far and suffered deeply. As he neared, she saw the dried blood on his arm, the exhaustion in his face, the way he favored one leg. Still, she didn't lower her weapon. He stopped several yards away, raising one hand in a gesture of peace. His voice, when he spoke, was hoarse but steady. "I seek a child." Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. The infant inside the house let out a soft cry as if answering him. The warrior's eyes flicked toward the sound eyes, dark with worry, grief, and fierce protectiveness. Clara had the sudden sense that if he meant harm, she never would have heard him approach. "Where is her mother?" Clara asked, her voice cracking from the weight of a question she already feared. His jaw tightened. "Gone, my sister. She was killed when raiders attacked our camp. They took the baby. I have tracked them for 2 days." He placed a hand over his chest, breathing hard. "I am Dakota." Clara swallowed. "And you think they came here?" "I followed their trail. It ends near your barn." The air between them tightened. Clara felt her protective instincts flare toward the baby she had held through the night, the child who had clung to life in her arms. But she also saw the torment in Dakota's face, the desperation of a man who had lost nearly everything. "If you are the child's kin," Clara said carefully, "you'll want to see her." But she didn't move aside, not yet. Dakota nodded once. Pain flickered across his features, not just physical, but emotional, old and deep. "I wish no harm," he said softly. "Only her safety." The sincerity in his voice cracked something inside. Clara, this was not a man running from violence. He was running toward the only family he had left. Clara lowered the rifle. Slowly. "Come inside," she said, her voice gentler. "The child is alive, but she's weak." Dakota closed his eyes, briefly, relief, grief, and gratitude washing over him all at once. He followed her into the home, limping heavily. And when he saw the tiny bundle sleeping near the fire, his expression shattered. He knelt beside the basket, his trembling hand hovering above the baby as though afraid to break her with a touch. Clara watched, feeling something shift in her heart. Two strangers, a child clinging to life, and a moment that would bind their fates far more tightly than any of them yet understood. The baby slept soundly, her tiny breath soft against the crackling warmth of the fire. Clara watched Dakota as he knelt beside the cradle basket, shoulders heavy with relief and exhaustion, the warrior's face so stoic and guarded the moment he arrived. Now soft-lined not by anger but by worry and overwhelming fatigue, Clara set down a cup of warm broth on the table. "You should eat before you fall over," she said gently. Dakota didn't argue. He rose slowly, favoring his wounded leg as he moved. Clara saw more clearly the depth of his injuries, cuts along his arms, bruising beneath his ribs, and a swollen knee that made each step painful. He had traveled miles like this, through a storm, with nothing but the hope of finding the child alive. He lowered himself into the chair with a quiet groan. Clara hesitated. "You're badly hurt. Those wounds need tending." "I will be fine," he said. But the strain in his voice betrayed him. Clara shook her head. "If you push yourself now..." You'll collapse, and the baby needs someone who can stand, walk, and hold her." Dakota looked toward the small bundle by the fire. The child stirred, letting out a soft whimper. His expression tightened with protectiveness so raw it made Clara's breath catch. "She is my sister's daughter," he said, voice low, "the last of her blood." He paused. "I cannot fail her, and you won't," Clara said. "But you need to rest. Let me help." For a moment, something silent and heavy passed between them, mistrust from the old world, instinctive caution. The history that lingered like smoke between settlers and the Apache. But then Dakota lowered his eyes and gave a single nod. Clara fetched clean water and claws as she knelt beside him. He stiffened, not out of fear, she sensed, but out of unfamiliarity. Clara's hands were gentle as she cleaned the blood from his forearm up close. She could see the weather and hardship etched into him, strength tempered with quiet suffering. "You fought those raiders alone?" she asked softly. Dakota nodded once. "They attacked in the night. Many of my kin were not with the camp I was hunting nearby by the time I returned." His jaw clenched. There was nothing left but tracks, and the child was gone. Clara swallowed the ache rising in her chest. She had known loss, her husband, her unborn child, but the devastation reflected in Dakota's eyes held a depth she couldn't imagine. "And you followed them?" "Here," she said. "I followed hope," he corrected. Quietly, the room fell silent except for the crackling fire and the baby's tiny breaths. "When she finished tending his wounds." Clara stepped back. "You won't be traveling anywhere today," she said plainly. Dakota didn't protest this time. His exhaustion had settled deep, pulling at his eyelids and shoulders. "I will sleep on the floor," he said, gesturing toward the hearth. "You'll sleep in the spare room," Clara insisted. "You need a proper bed." Dakota looked at her, studying her face, her posture, the firmness of her voice. She realized he was trying to understand her, her kindness, her courage, her insistence on helping a stranger finally. He nodded with quiet respect as Dakota rested. Clara tended the baby, feeding her again, rocking her, humming old lullabies she had almost forgotten each time she looked at the child. Peace settled into her heart like warm sand later. When she carried the infant past the room where Dakota rested, she found him awake, leaning on one elbow. His expression softened when he looked at the child, then at her. "You saved her," he said quietly. Clara shook her head. "We saved her." In that moment, something changed, something small yet undeniable. A fragile thread connected the three of them now, woven out of survival, grief, and a shared determination to protect the child who had brought them together. None of them knew how much deeper that thread would bind their lives in the days to come. By the third day, the homestead felt strangely different, no longer just Clara's quiet refuge, but a place shared by three fragile lives pieced together by circumstance. Dakota's strength was slowly returning. He moved with less pain, though still with caution, and helped where he could, fixing the porch hinge, gathering water, carving a new cradle piece for the infant he called Ayana. Clara tried not to stare when she caught him working with practiced skill, but something in the calm focus of his hands comforted her in a way she couldn't explain. She had expected tension, perhaps fear, maybe even conflict instead. The days settled into a rhythm. Ayana slept more soundly. Dakota spoke quietly, offering rare but thoughtful words. Clara felt the loneliness she'd carried for so long beginning to loosen its grip, but just as peace began to settle over the homestead, danger returned. It began with the horses. The sun was dipping behind the ridge when Clara heard the animals snort sharply and stomp as if agitated. She stepped out onto the porch. Dakota was already near the corral, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the tree line. The calm she had grown used to seeing in him was replaced by something intense and alert. Clara hurried toward him. "What is it?" "Tracks," Dakota said quietly. "Fresh, more than one pair." Her chest tightened. "The raiders?" Dakota nodded once. They followed my trail. They are looking for something left behind or someone. Hyena Clara felt cold settle deep into her bones. What do we do? Dakota's voice was firm but steady. We protect the child and ourselves. He turned to her. You know this land better than I. Where can we hold ground? Clara swallowed hard. She had never imagined standing beside an Apache warrior, planning to defend her home, but fear did not weaken her, not when Ayana's tiny breaths depended on them. She pointed toward the barn. The north wall is thick, only one way, and I can cover the entrance from the loft window. Dakota nodded with approval. Good. They moved quickly. Clara gathered Ayana and a small bag of supplies. Tucking the baby clothes against her chest, Ayana whimpered, sensing the tension in the air. Shh. Sweetheart, Clara whispered. We're here. We won't let anything happen to you. Dakota armed himself with the weapons he had left, his bow and a short knife. He positioned himself near the barn door. Silent and focused, Clara took her place in the loft, heart pounding, rifle steady despite the tremble in her fingers. World outside grew unnervingly quiet. Then the footsteps came, slow, measured, more than one. Clara saw two shadows approach the barn. Their voices low and rough. She recognized the tone, people looking for something to take. Not caring who they hurt to get at, Ayana whimpered again. And one of the raiders lifted his head sharply. You hear that? Sounds like a baby. Clara's heart slammed painfully. But she held her position. Dakota stepped into the open, his stance calm, almost deceptively so. Leave now, he said. Voice like stone, the raiders bristled. We want what's ours. Dakota didn't flinch. The child is not yours. Clara watched, terrified yet unable to look away. The tension coiled like a drawn bowstring. When one of the raiders lunged forward, Dakota moved faster, using skill rather than strength. In a sudden, decisive motion, he disarmed the man and forced him back without taking a life. Clara, seeing the second raider raise his weapon, fired a warning shot into the dirt near his feet. The crack of the rifle echoed across the fields. Message was clear, outnumbered by courage rather than force. The raiders fled into the dusk, cursing as they disappeared. Clara let out a long, shaking breath as Dakota looked up at her. Gratitude shone in his eyes, but something else too, something unspoken, powerful, and new in the quiet after the danger passed. Clara realized something profound. She had not stood behind Dakota, she had stood with him, and together they had protected the child whose life now bound theirs in ways neither had expected. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, spilling soft gold across the Apache camp. Its warmth stretched over the earth like a blessing, touching the hides of the tents, the horses tied near the river, and finally, Eleanor, who sat with little Kiona nestled peacefully in her arms. The baby's tiny hand was curled around Eleanor's thumb, holding on with surprising strength for her small body. Eleanor had not realized how deeply she missed the feeling of a child clinging to her. Every soft breath, every sleepy murmur tugged at wounds she thought were buried. But instead of breaking her, Kiona's presence healed parts of her she didn't even know were still hurting. Across from her, Tawa watched quietly. He did not interrupt. He did not question. He simply observed the woman who had saved his daughter with her hands, fed her with her compassion, and calmed her with a tenderness no one in the tribe had been able to provide since the child's mother died. Eleanor felt his gaze but didn't turn away. For once, she wasn't afraid of being seen, not as a stranger or an outsider, but as a woman with a heart still capable of giving. What are you thinking? She finally asked, her voice soft. Tawa stepped closer, kneeling beside her so he wouldn't cast a shadow over the child. His tone carried the weight of unspoken appreciation. I'm thinking, he said, that my daughter smiles more in your arms than she ever has in mine. Eleanor looked down at the baby, her chest tightening. Children sense love. And she has yours too. Yes, he agreed. But I have been lost. Grief made me blind. And then you came. There was a long silence. The camp hummed with distant movement, women grinding corn, men tending to horses, children laughing at the water's edge, but around them the world felt strangely still. Kiona stirred, her dark lashes fluttering. When she opened her eyes, she didn't search for her father. She reached up toward Eleanor's face, brushing her cheek with tiny, curious fingers. Instinctively, Eleanor leaned into the touch. Taw, I saw the moment, and something shifted between them. Not romantic. Not yet. But profound. He spoke carefully, as if every word mattered. She knows you, he said. Not just as the woman who saved her. She knows your heart. Eleanor swallowed. And you? What do you see in me, Tawa? The question surprised him. He hesitated, jaw tightening, as though weighing the truth. I see a woman who carries sorrow but still chooses kindness, he said. A woman strong enough to cross into a world not her own. A woman who loves a child who is not of her blood as if she were. Her breath hitched. No settler, no townsman, no preacher had ever spoken to her with such quiet reverence. For so long, her grief had defined her. Her losses had caged her. But here was a man who saw beyond all of it. Here was a child who accepted her, without asking for anything but love. I didn't expect to care for her this much, Eleanor admitted. Sometimes I forget she isn't mine. Tawa leaned in slightly, not close enough to frighten her, but close enough that she could feel the sincerity radiating from him. Maybe, he said, she is yours. Not by blood, but by the bond you've made. Eleanor's eyes glistened. She knew what he meant, yet she also understood the complexity. Their worlds were divided by culture, prejudice, war, and fear. But in her arms lay the one thing that connected them, a child who needed them both. Kiona let out a happy coo, and they both looked at her at the same time. Their eyes met again, this time with a softness neither pulled away from. Something invisible but undeniable settled between them. Not romance, not obligation, a bond, a shared devotion shaped by a tiny life that had woven their hearts together. In that moment, Eleanor realized she no longer stood alone in her grief, because love, unexpected and fragile, had begun growing in a place where she thought nothing could ever bloom again. The dawn stretched across the horizon in soft amber and rose, spilling light over the quiet ranch. Clara stood on the porch, holding Ayana close, her eyes tracing the outline of the rolling hills that had been her home for so long. The homestead, with its sturdy wooden fence and weathered barn, had always been a place of solitude, but now it had become a sanctuary of possibility. Beside her, Dakota stood tall and steady. His broad shoulders caught the morning light, casting long shadows across the porch boards. The hardships of the past days were evident in the lines of his face, but there was a calm in his posture, a quiet confidence that came not from strength alone, but from a deep bond forged in fire, fear, and shared devotion. For weeks, they had lived side by side, caring for Ayana. Clara had fed her, warmed her, rocked her through storms, and tended to every small need with patience and unwavering love. Dakota had protected her, fought for her, and shared in the sleepless nights, learning in ways he had never imagined how trust and tenderness could exist alongside strength. Now, the question that had hovered unspoken between them reached its inevitable moment. Dakota spoke first, his voice low, almost reverent. Clara, I am strong enough to travel again. The land is safe for now, but the child. His eyes softened as they fell on Ayana. She belongs with her family, and she needs you as much as she needs me. Clara's heart tightened. She had grown attached in ways she could never have anticipated. The child's trust had awakened a love within her, a love she had believed long buried under grief and years of isolation. And yet leaving her home, the only life she had known, felt like stepping into the unknown. "I don't know if I belong anywhere beyond these hills," Clara admitted, her voice trembling. "This has been my life, my home, but she's changed everything." She looked down at Ayanna, who stirred, blinking up at her with curious eyes. "I can't imagine leaving her or you." Dakota reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from Clara's forehead. His touch was gentle, protective, yet filled with unspoken promise. "Then you don't have to," he said simply. "We can go forward together not because we are bound by duty, but because we choose to be a family." Clara felt the weight of those words settle over her like the morning sun, warming her in a way she hadn't felt in years. Choice, not obligation. Not necessity, love, shared responsibility, mutual respect. The foundation of a life she had thought impossible for herself. Slowly, deliberately, she nodded. Her eyes met Dakota's. In them, she saw the same mixture of hope, fear, and determination that mirrored her own. They would leave together, not as strangers, not as unlikely companions, but as a family forged by circumstance, strengthened by courage, and bound by the child who had brought them together. As they walked down the porch steps, Ayanna cradled safely in Clara's arms, Dakota at their side carrying a few supplies. The first light of day spread across the land, illuminating the path ahead. It was a path filled with uncertainty, yes, but also with promise, a promise that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. In that moment, Clara realized that she had not only saved a child, but had been transformed herself. She had discovered the power of nurturing, the strength and compassion, and the courage to open her heart once more. Dakota, too, had found in her care a solace he never knew he needed, a companion, a confidant, and a partner in the delicate art of family. They stepped onto the trail together, a trio united not by accident or blood, but by choice. And as the sun fully rose, spilling light over the hills and the homestead they were leaving behind, Clara whispered softly to the child she loved, "We're going home, Ayanna. All of us, together." The story closed on the quiet power of love's unexpected arrival, showing that family is not always born, it is made, chosen, and cherished.